1 minute ago, everything changed. Phones lit up across Washington and Wall Street at the same time. A court order dropped. Sudden, severe, unforgiving. Mar-a-Lago, the place that has functioned as Donald Trump's post-presidential command center, was no longer fully his to control. Not in the way it was an hour ago. Not in the way it has been for years. This wasn't a routine filing. This wasn't another motion buried in legal paperwork. This was the kind of move that makes even seasoned political operatives stop mid-sentence and refresh their feeds. And within moments, word spread that one of America's most respected conservative voices had reacted. Quietly, sharply, with words that cut deeper than any partisan attack. That reaction hasn't fully sunk in yet. But when it does, it may redefine how this moment is remembered. Stay with me, because what just happened is bigger than a property, bigger than a politician, and bigger than one court order. The United States has seen presidents investigated before. It has seen scandals, impeachments, courtroom drama. What it has almost never seen is a former president's power base disrupted at the physical level. Not metaphorically, not politically, but operationally. Mar-a-Lago isn't just a residence. It has functioned as a nerve center, a place where loyalty was rewarded, strategy was shaped, and influence was traded face to face. Historically, former presidents fade into memoirs and libraries. This one didn't. He consolidated. That's why today feels different. This isn't about words or tweets or rallies. This is about access, control, and leverage. When the ground beneath a power structure shifts, everything built on it trembles. Historians often talk about turning points in hindsight. Today feels like one of those moments while it's still unfolding, a quiet rupture that may later be marked as the beginning of a much larger collapse or transformation. To understand how we got here, you have to rewind not weeks but years. Long before today's order, there were questions that never quite went away. Questions about money, about numbers, about how value was calculated depending on who was asking. Behind closed doors, investigators weren't looking at speeches or slogans. They were looking at spreadsheets, loan documents, appraisals, internal communications that told a different story than the public image. What emerges isn't a single decision or a single dispute. It's a pattern, a way of operating where the line between optimism and exaggeration blurred and then disappeared altogether. Mar-a-Lago sat at the center of that pattern, a property whose symbolic value often overshadowed its financial reality. And over time, that gap became impossible to ignore. At the heart of this case is something almost everyone understands instinctively. You can't tell two completely different stories about the same asset depending on what benefits you most. Investigators focused on valuations that swung wildly based on context. Numbers that soared when leverage was needed and shrank when obligations came due. Documents that didn't line up. Timelines that raised eyebrows. To most people, it's like telling a bank your house is worth a fortune, while telling the tax authority it's barely worth mentioning. Simple, relatable, and deeply problematic. As the paper trail came together, the picture sharpened. Not of chaos, but of consistency. The same techniques, the same justifications, over and over again. That's when the legal posture changed. What had been review became action. And action, once triggered, moves fast. Here's where the story takes a turn that few expected. Support doesn't usually vanish all at once, it erodes. Quietly, institutions that once looked the other way began cooperating. Professionals who had benefited from proximity started recalculating risk. Silence replaced public loyalty, and then came the break, a signal that the old rules no longer applied. When people who once stood to gain decide the cost is too high, momentum shifts instantly. This is the emotional peak of the story, because it's where isolation begins, not shouted from podiums but whispered in boardrooms and law offices, the moment when a figure used to absolute control realizes the room is emptying. The most striking responses didn't come from rivals. They came from observers known for restraint. Legal scholars pointed out the seriousness of intervening in operational control. Financial experts noted how rare it is for courts to move this decisively without confidence in their footing. And then there was the reaction that stunned even veteran commentators. A conservative intellectual voice known for measured criticism and deep respect for institutions framed the moment not as political drama, but as consequence, not ideology. Arithmetic, not persecution. Process. When people like that speak, others listen, because they don't speak often, and they don't speak lightly. This is where the pressure becomes unbearable. Every path forward carries damage. Fight everything and risk escalating losses that can't be undone. Concede ground and fracture the image that has been central to survival. It's ego versus endurance. Narrative versus numbers. And the walls are closing in from both sides. Those around him understand the dilemma. Privately, they know that time is no longer an ally. Every delay compounds uncertainty. Every statement locks in expectations that reality may not support. Zoom out and the implications stretch far beyond one man or one estate. This is about whether power can indefinitely shield itself from structure, whether branding can outpace accountability, whether institutions still assert themselves when pressure mounts. For decades, Americans have argued that no one is above the law. That phrase is tested not in theory but in moments like this, when enforcement isn't abstract, when it has an address. Whatever happens next, appeals, reversals, escalation, this moment will be remembered as a line crossed. A reminder that influence has limits and that eventually the numbers have to add up. This isn't over. In many ways, it's just beginning.